All right, so thanks everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Beckman. I'm a senior at Marquette University. I'm presenting my presentation on bodyboarding, which I've been working on researching and looking into all semester. Talk a little bit about how we're going to train our athletes, as well as just kind of the background knowledge on what bodyboarding is for those of you who don't know what it is. We're going to start off with a little background information. It originates back to ancient form of riding waves by the indigenous Polynesians, and the earliest recorded sightings of these wave riders was in 1778 in present-day Hawaii. But modern-day bodyboarding wasn't founded until 1971 in North America, and since then has grown into a worldwide industry with strongholds in Australia, Peru, Chile, South Africa, and Japan. Now, before I show a little video of what bodyboarding really is, we're going to look into some of the trick terminology, as you'll see a lot of it in the video. There's 5 main tricks variations, and then the athletes kind of put twists into them and combinations of variations, but these are the 5 main ones. You have your aerial 360 and your 360s, which the regular 360 is just staying on the water's surface and rotating 360 degrees. Whereas the aerial, they're actually going airborne up off the wave and then rotating 360 degrees. Very common one is an air roll spin, also known as an ARS, which is essentially a barrel roll or a log roll going up off the wave and rotating sideways up and over. Inverts, which take an extreme amount of core conditioning, is tweaking the board down with the momentum of the wave and then swinging it back into the wave and trying to ride back up. This is to both a trick, but also to gain speed to get up the wave and launch up in order to do something like the last one, which is a backflip. In order to show you this video, so this is from the Bodyboarding World Championships. And here you can see someone on the bodyboard. They're shooting under the barrel of the wave, leaning into the wave. This takes a lot of core strength, and they're coming up. And as you can see, this guy just did an air roll spin up and over the wave. He's coming up, and as you can see, that's upper body is mostly only used to stabilize himself on the board, and everything is done by their feet, which they're able to wear flippers in competition. So they use their flippers to gain speed when trying to catch a wave, and they don't really use their arms like surfers to catch the wave. So they use their flippers. Back over the presentation and jump into competitions. Competitions, we have 5 judges. The highest and lowest scores are thrown out, leaving 3 scores to be averaged for their final score. And waves are scored on 1 to 10 based on their difficulty, how innovative their tricks are, the combination and variety of the tricks, and then the speed, power, and flow of the run. Heats can vary anywhere around from 20 to 35 minutes, depending on the tournament. And athletes lock in their 2 highest waves with a perfect score being 20 points. And this being said, there is no limit on how many waves one can hit in a heat, so they can keep going, keep trying, until the time limit's up, and then their highest 2 waves are scored by the judges, leaving them there with their competition score. Some special considerations for our athletes. This takes immense core and back stabilization, as when they're launched up into the air, they have to withstand intense impact forces, which can be similar to just simply doing a belly flop onto concrete as they're coming back down onto landing on their board. As well as withstanding intense rotational forces as that wave is trying to pull them endlessly up into the wave and flip them over. So having to keep their core tight. They also need explosive lower body as well as muscular endurance, as they're propelling their whole body based off just their feet and their flippers. So being able to have an explosive burst of energy to catch that wave. They also need to have extreme flexibility and joint mobility to withstand those crashes. Those waves just destroy them into the seabed and put them in a whole bunch of weird just contortions and body movements. So And then as well, when they crash, being able to hold their breath for long periods of time under the water. And then finally, a relatively low body weight, which is interesting, as I came to find in this research, is they need to be relatively light in order to get those big height waves and tricks off the waves. So trying to build the training program off of trying to keep them low body weight and not build a whole bunch of muscular strength. Some common injuries, I found a research article where a couple doctors looked into emergency room records to see what kind of injuries these bodyboarders are coming into. And the three top ones were soft tissue injuries from either hitting the board and or the seabed, dislocations and fractures from being tossed into the seabed by the waves, and then spinal cord injuries from hitting their head on the seabed, which wasn't as common, but it was a very serious one, so I thought I would throw it in there. So for the testing I would like to do, as you could see through the video, most of this sport is very core heavy and then lower body heavy, and it's not a ton of upper body strength. So what I'm going to be focused on is core, how long they can keep their body in a rigid state for. So we're going to be using a plank test for that, as well as throwing a little bit of upper body strength and do a push-up test. For lower body, I want to get more of a muscular endurance test and go for a Nordic hamstring curl for duration, as well as the vertical jump test to kind of test and keep track of their powers throughout their testing. And then a lot of flexibility and range of motion testing to make sure they're constantly improving their range of motion and flexibility so that they're preventing injuries along down the road. Here we'll take a look at the competition schedule. This is going off of last year's competition schedule in 2019. It starts in February and ends in October, but can go all the way into the beginning of November if you make it to those world championships at the end of the competition season. And as you can see, they're traveling all around the world. So this is something I wanted to keep in mind, is they're going to be going through a bunch of time zone changes, as well as just from day to day. As you can see, some of these tournaments end one day, they have one day off, and then the next tournament is starting. So these athletes that are trying to qualify for world championships are going from tournament to tournament throughout 9 whole months and almost the whole year. So as you can see, this leaves a very short off season, and something I've decided to institute into my training program is using these big breaks in competition as mini off seasons. So as you can see that I've highlighted here, the first tournament ends March 8th. And the second one doesn't start until June 20th. So you have almost a month and a half of nothing to do. So we're going to be using that as a second off season. And then halfway through the season, we're going to have a third off season where we'll be able to apply those off season training tendencies to try to rebuild our athletes up to peak performance and regain everything that they lost in those heavy competition seasons where they're not able to do as much lifting. So then looking at my annual plan, it's going to look a little different from everyone else's because of those multiple off seasons in there. So we're going to start off with our big off season that will lead into a preseason before our competition starts. And then we'll have that month or two of competition, switch back into a heavier workload, into off season 2, back to competition, back to off season 3, and then finish a year off in our competition in season 3. Looking at our off season, our goal is to focus on increasing core, back, and lower body strength, flexibility and mobility, and our cardiovascular endurance. I'm going to have our athletes in the weight room with me 3 days a week. We'll start with a warm-up and do some sprint intervals on our bike, 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off. This is to try and simulate the athlete finding that wave that they want to hit. 20 seconds of all sprint, trying to catch up to that wave, and then 40 seconds off, trying to teach the athlete how to recover and be able to go on their run. We're going to have them 2 days in the gym working on flexibility and mobility, heavy stuff, and then 1 day strength training. And on top of all of this, they're also required to do yoga 2 times a week on their own time in between practice times. And this is for extra flexibility, mobility, as well as breathing techniques for these athletes to learn. Our flexibility and mobility days are going to look like more like this. The intensity is going to be rather low, high reps, low weight. We're focused on range of motion stuff. We're going to be doing 10 to 12 reps per exercise, 3 to 5 sets, slow and controlled. As I stated earlier, we don't want these athletes putting on a ton of muscle weight, so solely doing these exercises for increased mobility. So this means doing some of these example exercises with kettlebells, body weight stuff, dumbbells, resistance bands, in order to help pull those athletes into a deeper stretch, a deeper movement, in order to increase those range of motions without getting all that extra body weight muscle mass added to them. So some example exercises for the lower body include a Messier squat, side lunge, shin box angles, hurdles over unders, landmine squats, and then we'll do some upper body stuff as well with bands around the world, T-spine rotation, thread the needle, and banded lat stretch. Our strength days are going to be way more intensity, with high intensity working on strength and power output. We're going to be doing 3 to 5 reps, 3 to 4 sets at 70-90% of 1 rep max. We're focused mostly on lower body, as upper body is not nearly used as much in this sport. We're working on that power generation output, building up their strength and not so much looking for that hypertrophy, but we're building those power strengths. So some example exercises, we're looking at deadlifts, good mornings, glute bridges, box jumps, single leg RDLs with plate punch, kettlebell hinge and punch, really looking for that core, back, and hips strength. And right after our off season, we're going to jump straight into our preseason. Our goal in our preseason is to prepare these athletes for peak performance through specific prep movements. And my preseason is going to be a little bit shorter just because our off season isn't that long. And we're going to be keeping the same weekly plan of 3 days with me, 2 days of yoga on their own, but we're going to have a heavier focus on core back strength and rotational power, trying to get my athletes ready for competition, increase their core back strength so that they can go out there and perform the tricks time and time again. So some example exercises, we're doing an overhead walking lunge, banded anti-rotations, hip bridge iso holds, cliff hangers, ab rollouts, monster walks, and farmer carries. So this preseason is going to be short, but trying to blast these athletes into peak performance right before we get to competition season. And then jumping into competition, as you can see, we're trying to maintain this peak as best as possible, make sure athletes are prepared and recovered for competitions. But there's not going to be a whole lot of lifting going on as athletes are traveling all around the world in short amounts of time. I put that schedule back up there, just kind of reiterate. We're primarily focused on making sure this athlete is recovered both physically and mentally, as they can be ending a tournament one day, have one day off and going right back to another tournament. So I'm not going to have a whole bunch of time to be trying to get these athletes in the weight room, working out, lifting weights. So all these exercises we'll be doing in competition in season is mostly going to be yoga, getting these athletes a little bit of strength and flexibility out of it, as well as just relaxing and calming their bodies down after 10 days of competition and getting them ready for the next one. And just a reminder, we have those off-season times thrown in there throughout the competition season. So hopefully anything that we lose during these times of lower strength training, we'll be able to gain that back through our off-season bursts throughout the year. And hopefully we can, this sport hasn't had a whole lot of interest through sports performance, just because their competition season is so heavy and they're not as much focused on training as much and more practicing. But I think implementing a sports coach into this, you can see really big benefits down the line, especially both mentally and physically. So thanks for tuning in. My name's Zach again, and any questions for anyone?
Yeah, Zach, I have a question. Obviously, it's a unique sport, and like you identified early on, you've got multiple off-season blocks followed by competition phases, and there's perhaps a what's the word here? A tendency to want to go back into like a true off-season and to like blunt the knife, so to speak, and just go back to like fundamental works. But what do you think about in terms of your off-season stuff? Are you going to try and keep those guys in pretty good shape during those off-season periods, or is it kind of regressing all the way back to kind of square one and kind of restarting a build type of thing?
No, so hopefully since those competition seasons are really only about a month at a time before we hit that next off-season training, I'm hoping I'm not going to have to completely go back to square one and restart with these athletes. And that's kind of why I want these athletes to be going through yoga sessions and stuff throughout the competition seasons, because they're not going to be, maybe they won't be progressing because they won't be do heavy lifting, but they still are going to get that strength and flexibility out of that yoga to hopefully maintain at least a little bit. And maybe they'll only regress a little bit. So we'll be able to just jump right back into the thick of it and hit it hard in those secondary off seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this isn't a question, but just like a comment. It's like, the more you think about this sport, it's massively like posterior chain in terms of like spinal erectors and all the way up into the cervical spine, like holding the head up, pulling on the like downside arm, like the arm that's not towards the top of the wave, and pulling that edge of the board up and stuff like that. So it's just, yeah, I'd have to imagine that all of these athletes probably struggle with lower back tightness, hamstring tightness, issues around their hips and their shoulders and cervical spine, just because it's pretty much just an isometric game, isn't it? For however long that their ride is on the wave. So yeah, just a comment more than a question.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're almost their whole entire while they're doing their run on the wave is pretty much locking out their body, back erection, and holding that neck as tight as they can be and trying to be aerodynamic. So it's almost a whole isometric hold through the 40 seconds that they're on that wave. So it will probably be pretty tough, and that's why I'm trying to implement a lot of yoga stretching, getting these athletes just loose after 10 days of competition.
Zach, you spoke on the need for these athletes to resist rotational forces during their sport. Do you have any sort of exercises or strategies to attack that need?
Yeah, so I didn't have a ton of those rotational ones in there, but we can do the pal off press, as well as working on trying to do maybe implementing stuff on a Kaiser machine if we have one of those, and just trying to do stuff like that in order to get those athletes that strength. But then again, they're going to get a lot of that from just practicing over and over again. So just making sure core stability is super good and their back erectors and all their back muscles are strengthened as well.
I've got one, Zach. So we talked a lot about in the sports we looked at this year, really trying to simulate, like, obviously it doesn't apply to some of the Marquette sports as much, but some of the more unique sports like spike ball that John was talking about earlier, trying to simulate the surfaces that you play on in training. And I know you mentioned sand. Did you consider implementing anything like that? Like, depending on facility access, obviously, but incorporating some sort of training that has to do with exercises with the water, because they spend so much of their time on there, or did you more leave that to them practicing that separately on their own outside the weight room?
Yeah, so I thought about that and trying to implement some of that, but thinking back on what's available to a lot of sports performance coaches, a lot of people don't have access to water, or they're doing training in a place like the Midwest where during their off season is the winter and they don't have access. They can't just go out to a beach in the middle of winter and practice. So I kind of left that more towards the actual coaches of the sport, and they get in that experience kind of when they're out practicing, and trying to more focus on their strength attributes in the weight room with me.